Question 4. What have you learned from your audience feedback? From my audience feedback, I was able to gauge what was successful about my media products, what was less successful, and if my product met the audience's expectations. This was useful as I was able to better my ancillary tasks to a professional standard. The way in which I conducted my audience research was through structured interviews and questionnaires. I then analysed the data and created pie charts so that the data became more empirical and visually understandable. When conducting the audience feedback for my album advert, I was provided with a range of responses. An example of one of the questions I asked was, what do you feel was successful about the album advert? By asking such a question, I was able to understand what about my advert was the most visually enticing and needed the least amount of improvement. From this question, I received feedback such as the colour scheme and editing being the most successful thing about my advert.
The use of purple in the title is quite interesting.
This provided feedback necessary to determine that I would keep the puppet warp as a basis of my background alongside the fiery colour scheme. Another question that I asked my audience was, do you have any criticisms about the advert? This allowed me to understand the negative aspects of my advert and improve on them when necessary. An example of this would be my audience's suggestion to make some of my titles bolder and possibly add some direct address to my artist.
A picture of the artist on the front.
This feedback from my audience allowed me to acknowledge their opinions and interpret their stereotypes of adverts. From my previous audience research into album covers, I found that my audience's typical expectations of an album cover is for it to have some link to the artist, an eye-catching colour scheme, a bold title, and some information about the contents, such as a track list or logos.
There's a useful list of songs on the back of the album.
I tried to include these conventions in my album cover, then conducted audience feedback to analyse whether my audience felt that I'd met their expectations. I found that my audience thought the most successful thing about my album was the engaging colour scheme, the use of fire that links to the music video, and the use of the most common conventions such as a record label logo and a track list. From this I've learnt what my audience deemed successful about my album cover and whether or not they feel it looked professional. I also asked my audience what they felt could be changed about the album cover and learnt that they believed it would be more interesting by adding more detail to the spine and possibly including a picture of the artist. I have learnt from my audience feedback more about my audience's expectations and their criticisms towards both of my ancillary tasks. Their opinion is useful as the audience are the people who are going to be viewing the media products and judging whether or not they encourage them to watch my music video. I found their criticisms useful in making any improvements to both my media products.